Hello 508, this is Dr. Keisler, and I wanted to give you some feedback on weeks 9 and 10. I haven't checked in with you, and I know this week you are working on your two-thirds exam, so I thought it'd be a good week to catch up and give you a little bit of feedback on your past two CPAs. So I went back to the one that we did on meaning vocabulary, and that was the one where we had several screencasts by me for you to watch. And so I read through your forum posts, and as usual, I tried to pick up on some themes. So I think that the quotes on this page that I lifted off some of your forum posts address the theme that many of you felt that the learning, both teachers in the videos really demonstrated that getting kids excited and engaged and interested in learning vocabulary was really one of the things that made both of these examples very effective. And so I read this in nearly every post that you thought the students were really engaged, they were contributing in meaningful ways, and that the strategies and activities were really designed to help students not just access what they were interested in, but access and tap their schema and prior knowledge, and that these were really powerful strategies to use for vocabulary, which they are. And so I was glad that as I read that, your posts, that many of you picked up on that. So that was definitely a theme. The students, I liked this particular quote, student-centered vocabulary techniques. So it was obvious that the design of that instruction and the strategies that were chosen and the way that the teacher ran those lessons really was created or planned out of an interest in the students and kind of where they were, where they needed to go, what they were interested in, and how the teachers could best capture that and use it as part of their effective instruction. Many of you also picked up on just the overall environments that you saw in Baker's and Craven's classrooms. And so I think, again, it was really obvious that the kids were engaged, but that the teachers seemed to really have this awareness that making students comfortable in class and making an environment where students would be engaged starts with the students first again. And so they seem to have created classroom settings where the students felt really comfortable sharing. The students were definitely felt like they were active participants, and I think on the previous slide someone mentioned that it was obvious the kids felt that what they shared would be heard and be validated, and so that they were very willing participants in that classroom. And this quote I thought was neat. There was strong evidence that this culture of word awareness was a common practice in the room. And so the environment that was created over time, but it was a classroom that appeared, the classrooms that appeared to be inclusive and comfortable, and the kids really seemed to be engaged in those environments. And so in thinking about what makes for effective vocabulary instruction, well, those kind of environmental factors or classroom culture factors really make lots of instruction more effective, right? Because the more you can engage kids and the more that you make that classroom a safe space, the more effective your instructional practices and the strategies that you choose are likely to be. So that was great that lots of you picked up on it. And I just picked a few quotes that kind of, I thought, exemplified that. But that was something that I definitely read over and over and over again in your posts. And so we did a great job, and I know that we've spent a couple of weeks now talking about what makes for a good post. And I think taking a look at those posts, you've really taken that feedback to heart. So the quality of the post has definitely improved, and I even noticed that in the next set, even though it was a little bit different. I noticed that in the set that addressed the Annenberg workshops as well. So some other thoughts that I noticed or wanted to just touch on that I saw in the vocabulary forum was this one that I think and this may have been John, but he was talking about the use of the dictionary. And some students want to stop and look up words that they don't know immediately. We talk about your community college students. Many of these will do this with every word they aren't sure of, and this takes them out of the flow of reading and can negatively impact their comprehension and will certainly cost them time. To me, I thought that was a really well thought out and interesting comment to make, because the dictionary is one of the strategies that, of course, we want students to know how to use it. But you're right. I actually had this conversation yesterday. I was out in Indio doing some professional development for the Riverside Migrant Ed program, and it was on vocabulary, and we were talking about this idea that some students are already going to be struggling to make meaning of the text, and so pulling from the resources of the glossary or the dictionary really does interrupt the reading process, and so they have to look it up. Most times the definition that they're going to find anyway in the glossary or the dictionary, they're going to have trouble understanding anyway, or it's going to be difficult. It's not really like it's going to answer the question that they have. For some of them it will. Some students are going to use it to kind of validate what they thought the word might mean, but most students are actually just looking up the word because they don't know what it means at all, and then they have to go back to the reading and try to think about what the definition was. And so again, it's a strategy that they should know, but it's a better strategy for students that are better readers. If I stop or if you stop to look up a word because you don't know it, it's a lot easier for you to get re-engaged in that text or for you to make meaning from that. A struggling reader who's then going to stop and look up one word or several words is going to have a really difficult time getting re-engaged in that text because their comprehension has already been disrupted. And then I had asked that question at the end about how did you think these strategies or these instructional practices were different from the more traditional approach. And so one of the things that I saw you guys talking about over and over again was the idea that these methods of vocabulary were much more engaging, that kids were surrounded by this culture of words and talking about the words, and this differs quite a bit from that more traditional or the kind of instruction you may have received around vocabulary, which likely wasn't that much instruction at all, or was teaching the vocabulary before you read, and that's kind of the only time you do it. Or kind of the even lesser model would be when teachers just give the list of vocabulary, have the kids kind of work on their own independently, and then really don't give a lot of explicit instruction or time to the study of words. And so the research bears out that would be what is considered the more traditional model. Very little time being spent explicitly instructing on vocabulary. So then we moved to the sets of Annenberg workshops that you had. So I gave you a choice of the video workshops that you could view. Some of them addressed writing, some addressed different topics related to literature, multicultural literature, and critical literacy. And what I saw in all of the posts, so whether you watched the writing videos or the ones that were more geared towards literature, selection of literature, and using literature in the classroom, was this idea of authenticity. And so in writing or in talking about the discussions that were being had in the videos, there was definitely interest on your part, or you had noticed that the tasks that the students were engaged in were more authentic, and part of that was in the kids' freedom or flexibility to choose their own topics, to have different types of discussions, to within a genre. The teachers were teaching writing as a process, but in some of the videos kind of allowing students to explore their own topics within that genre. And so that's something that you don't always see in classrooms, particularly now that we have this emphasis on testing writing in many grades. You see kind of this very formulaic approach to writing, but you all seem to pick up on this idea of authenticity. So in the examples that students are provided with, in the texts that were chosen that students could make those connections to, or that were relevant to their lives and their cultures and their language. And so this idea of authenticity is particularly paramount when talking about writing, but obviously very significant when you're talking about literature and selection of literature. So kind of what's interesting in writing is that more kind of unlike reading, people tend to view writing as a much more intimate task. And so I think that the authenticity piece may even be stronger or come into play more when you're talking about writing. So that choice can be a real driver of motivation and interest when you choose your own topics. And so it's actually was quite interesting to read many of the things that you guys wrote when you were talking about writing instruction. And several of you voiced this idea that you yourselves aren't that comfortable as writers, don't necessarily enjoy teaching writing, feel that maybe you don't teach writing very well. And I thought, for me personally, this was very timely. I'm just wrapping up my study on writing and writing instruction in classrooms with English language learners. And we didn't set out to study teacher beliefs, so we really set out to examine instructional practice. And these past 2 weeks, we've been writing up the findings and the discussion section. And really what we found is that the thing that came up most often was, not about, and it's not a surprise, I've done similar studies, but we didn't set out with this mindset this time, was that, more than the professional development or more than the training or more than the expectations set by the school, the thing that the teachers talked about most and that we observed influenced their writing most were their beliefs and their feelings about writing. So very powerful on the part of the teacher is the teacher's own perception about writing, the importance of writing, how they feel about their ability, their own efficacy for teaching writing, were very, very significant influences on not just the quality of the instruction that they provided, but also on the amount of instruction that was provided or the time that was devoted to writing. And so in many of these videos, you picked up the idea that good instruction around writing included modeling and providing students examples of really high quality models, whether those came from the teacher and were student examples, or those were literature themselves. And so sharing with students published pieces that are examples of those particular genres. So planning was another theme that came through in many of the videos, and that applied to both the writing and to the literature piece. So thinking about what the students need, the planning came into play when we were talking about reviewing the videos concerning English learners, like giving them that time to do the planning before they do the writing. It gets them to kind of practice the language, use the language, talk about the language before they need to write. And so that kind of really strengthens that reading, writing, language connection piece. And then in terms of the literature videos, the planning in the selection of text and matching appropriate text with your students or the groups of students. So that was one of those themes that came through. And then I noticed a lot of folks commented on the peer feedback piece. And so, in writing, you saw in those different writing modules, you saw evidence of small groups. And within those small groups, students were reading their pieces aloud to one another. They were giving each other some feedback. And the teacher can't always be the one to give that feedback. And peer feedback can be a really powerful influence on student writing. And so, again, through these sets of videos, it was a little bit more difficult for me to find the themes, but I think that I was able to find them because there were a lot of overlap in the videos in terms of describing what makes for effective practice, whether it be in the writing or in the literature. So I am just about out of time, but I'm glad that I got to kind of go through those and spend a couple minutes giving you some feedback on the work that you've been doing. Like I said, those posts have really improved, and so this week you're all working on your 2/3 exam, and I'm sure if you kept up on the writing and the screencast that you should be just fine. If you have any questions or have any problems, I'll check into my email a few times this weekend in case any hiccups arise. So have a great weekend, and I will talk to you next week.